All right, we are on number 2 there, talking about an analytical Bible study. Last week we talked about a synthetical Bible study, which means to form the whole by combining the parts. We're looking at the big picture. It's like looking at the cover of the box on your puzzle before you put the puzzle together. You want to see, well, where am I going with this? Am I building a barn? Is it a landscape scene? Is it a seascape? Is it people in there? What does it look like? So I've got a better idea of what I'm going to be putting together here. And that's the synthetical study. It's taking the broad look. And sometimes it can be looking at something as broad as the whole New Testament or the whole Old Testament, or a section of books like the poetical books, or the books of the law, or the Gospels, or sometimes it's just one book of the Bible, but it's a broader look. And then we take the next step is going to be analytical study. And an analytical Bible study means to separate the whole into the parts. Now I'm going to start breaking it down. This is kind of like when you're in your puzzle and you're going to now take all the pieces and you're going to put all the edge pieces in one section, and you're going to put all the color blue, the sky pieces over here, and all the ones with green like for brush and shrubbery over here, and you're going to kind of divide them up and organize yourself so that you can better put this picture together. And that's the analytical study. And an analytical study, separate the whole into the parts. It's number A there. An outline provides a framework on which to build. And so we talked about using an outline with your synthetical, and now you're going to break your outline down into a little more detail here. And you're going to outline the area you're analyzing. So this is going to outline the chapters and take them and break them down into sections further. It's like going from Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 to capital A, B, C, and even 1, 2, and 3 under that, and maybe small a, B, and C under that. You're going to start breaking it down to its sections as you look at it. And again, like I told you, if you have a study Bible, it probably already has an outline either at the beginning of the book, or mine has it right in the book. So at the beginning of each section, it tells you what this section is about. And you can use that, but I encourage you to write your own outline first and then look at theirs and compare it. Don't get lazy. When I was in school, I was lazy, and I tried to make everybody else do the work for me. And don't get lazy. Do your own work and doing that. And to begin with, it's going to be hard because you're not used to doing it, but the more you do it, the better you'll get at it as well. And then you want to letter B there, work on natural paragraphs and divisions, not always chapter and verse division. Remember, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are not always the breaking point. Sometimes chapter 1 will continue into chapter 2, or sometimes chapter 2 thought will start in chapter 1. The chapters were added many, many years after the Bible was written to help us to be able to, so I can give you a reference. So I'll tell you, we'll turn to page number section down at the bottom of the right-hand column. You got to just tell you, here's the chapter and verse reference. And so it made it so we could find our way through the Bible easier. But they're not necessarily, they tried, but they didn't always hit the breaking point. So your outline may not follow the chapter and verse, and keep that in mind. So work with natural paragraphs. In my Bible, again, it puts a lot of times it'll put a letter P and with a line showing a new paragraph. Some study Bibles will do that. Others will break it, have a break there, or some way to show you this is a new paragraph and it's kind of a new thought in there as well. And so you want to look for the natural paragraphs and the natural divisions. For example, if you go to Ephesians chapter 5, you've got a section that talks about the fruit of the Spirit. It's very clear. Here's where it starts and here's where it ends. And that's a natural division because it's one thought kind of combined together right there. And so keeping that in mind. And then give each section a brief descriptive title. You want to just kind of put a title there to say this is what it's about in your own words. It doesn't have to be fancy. Now, when I do my messages, I have an outline, and every outline has a title. I don't always tell you the title. Now, I know some pastors will. They'll say point number 1 is this, and point number 2 is this, and especially if they like to alliterate or something like that. But it just helps me to kind of keep my thought flow going in the right direction. And so I would encourage you, and let me stop here and say this, though. You don't have to do all this. You can do what was comfortable with you, but you got to do something. And some works for you and some doesn't. You remember in school how you had to do the 3x5 cards before you wrote a paper? I don't do that because it never helped me. It didn't in school, and it doesn't now. So I don't do that. But it might work for you. It might be what works well for you. And so you've got to figure out what works here and what doesn't. But if you want to understand it, an outline really gives you something to follow along with. And so put in a title, which each section helps you out as well. And then number 2, list thoughts, comments, and cross-references under each section heading. Now, when I'm doing my study for a lesson like this or for a message, I do my basic outline first, and then I just kind of scribble under each point, oh, this verse goes with this point. And I'll write that reference, and I'll write a couple of words from the reference to help me remind me what it's about. And I think, oh, this is a good illustration. I'll write that there, and then I put this over here, and it's all scribbles. Now, if you've ever seen my handwriting, my best handwriting is scribble. Okay, I've got familiar tremors, and I can't write very well at all. And so that's why if I ever send you a card or a note, if I write anything on there at all, you ought to be really impressed. You ought to be, you're special, because I don't write a whole lot by hand anymore because I can't even read my own writing. I used to do my sermons, and it got to the point I was trying to figure out what I was writing. I couldn't figure it out, so I started typing them out. And I'm not a typist either, so that's better than not reading your sermon. And so, but when I'm doing this, I just got scribbled notes all over the place. It's not real organized. It's semi-organized. And then what I do is I take those scribbled notes, and then I make a better outline. And then I take it, I make a better outline until I make my final outline. So it's a step process. It's not done all at once, because you're finding verses. Right now I'm studying for a new series I'm going to start on Sunday called Profiting from the Prophets. And I've got all kinds of articles and notes and verses, and they're all over my desk. They're spread out. Actually, I kind of put them in a neat pile so people wouldn't think I'm a messy person. But they're all over the place when I'm studying, and I'm highlighting things, and I'm scribbling things down here and there. And eventually it'll all start coming together. And so that's what you want to do with this. And so you're trying to organize your thinking. And so just any thoughts you have, oh, that's a good verse, or this is I wonder what this word means, or whatever else, cross-references, any comments, put them right there under that section heading on your study paper. And you can do this handwritten or on your computer as well. Okay, now letter C is always study each verse in context. So as you're going through, you always want to get a good feel for the context that you're looking at. Now, in order to do this, you want to use cross-references. Now, how many of you in your Bible, you have cross-references where you have your verse, and then next to it, under it, around it somewhere, maybe at the bottom page, you have verses that that cross-reference that verse? How many have that in your Bible? Okay? And you should have at least a reference Bible, and that has cross-references. Mine is a study Bible, so it's got notes and other things there as well. But you can start there. The best place, so we start with your mind first. What are the verses I think of when I read this verse? Does it make me think of any other verses? Then I usually look at my Bible and look at some of those cross-references. And then what I will do from there is I will go to my computer program. This is where we're going to go ahead and bring this up for you. And I'm going to go ahead and pop that up there. And so I can do a search. So let's say I'm going to go to Romans 12, 1 and 2. And so I can, what's the wrong one? I'm sorry, this is a search. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I'm going to go to Romans 12, 1 and 2. So I type in Romans 12, and I'm over there. So I'm doing a study on Romans 12, and Caleb's got to get me up on the screen here, so we're having a little technical difficulties. Now, I've mentioned already the Bible program, and what you're going to see today is the one I use. Is called the Online Bible. And the version for Windows is available to download free. You can download that one for free. And all you have to do is go on to onlinebible.net, I think it is. If you type Online Bible in, I think it's about the fourth one down. But you can find that called Online Bible. And they've got a version that you can get for Windows. You can download it for free, or you can buy a physical copy if you want that as well. Now, for Mac, you have to buy it. It's only available for purchase. And so this is the one for Mac. And this is the classic edition. There's a deluxe edition, and I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. But this is the one I use. And they're normally $39.95. And if you buy 2 to 4, it's $32. If you buy 5 or more, it's $24 each, plus the shipping. And so if you are interested in this program for the Mac, if you will let me know, if we can get enough, we'll order 5 of them and give you the discount price. We'll charge you the price plus shipping cost with that. And so if you're interested on that, after you see what it can do, I'll be glad for that. But the Windows program you can download for free, and it's got a lot in there that you can use. The Windows looks a little bit different than this. And how it looks on your screen. But usually what you come up with is you can see the online Bible at the top, and then you got different features you can do. Now, one of the features I can do is I can see my verse here, and I can go over here and I can look up, let me see, I've got to find where it's at here again and doing that. So cross-references under search. And so if I hit that, it gives me another box now. These are all cross-references for the top verse, verse number 1. And so these are all verses that they thought kind of went along with verse number 1 in my study of it. And so you can see I've got quite a few to choose from. Advantage of this is I've got them all right there in front of me. I don't have to be turning back and forth like I do with the ones in my Bible and seeing them. So they're all right there, right in front of me, easy to see. Some of them I can see why they chose. The other ones I'm saying, why did they choose that one? And they got to think about it for a while. And sometimes there are verses that are similar. Sometimes there are verses that are different and contrasting. It's saying the opposite point of view, whatever it might be. So I can look up cross-references for that. And so when you're doing the analytical study, you want to look up cross-references first with the Bible as a whole. So what are some other places in the Bible that I can compare with this scripture? And then with the book as a whole. What you're reading is part of a book. And it's part of the complete thought of the book. So I want to compare this verse with other verses in that same book. For example, 1 John, he tells me in 4 different places why he wrote the book. So if I'm reading why he wrote the book, I want to look at the other 3 places to see why else did he write the book, and comparing that and kind of fitting it together. And then you want to look at cross-references with the paragraph or section that's in. So in the whole section. So when I'm looking at the fruit of the Spirit in Ephesians, or Galatians chapter 5, I may also want to look over at the gifts of the Spirit and see how they compare together. Or I might want to go over to 1 Peter, where it has another list that's very similar to the fruit of the Spirit. It says to add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, and knowledge temperance, and so on. So it's a very similar list, and so I want to compare them with each other as well. And so I can cross-reference the paragraph. Then I'm going to cross-reference with the verses immediately before or after the verse. So I want to look at what was before there and what I want to look at what was after that verse to kind of see the context of it as well. And then number 5, I want to look and see, are there linking words? And linking words are words like for, or therefore, or but. Any word that's linking it with the thought before. Somebody once said this: when you see a therefore, find out what it is there for. Because every therefore is there for a reason. It tells us there is something there before that will tell us what the therefore is there for. Do you get all that? Basically, it's there for a reason. For example, Romans 12, 1 and 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren. So what is the therefore for? Well, it might be the verse previous. It might be the chapter previous. In this case, I believe it's the whole book previous. In Romans chapters 1 through 11, Paul talks about salvation. And then he says, now, because we have this great salvation, therefore, let's give our lives to God. And so the therefore is there for a reason. So whenever you see a connecting word, you want to see what is connecting from and what is connecting to. That's important to look at. All right, that number 6, are there references to other places, passages, or people? Does he talk about another place? Does he talk about another passage? Does it refer to an Old Testament scripture, or Peter wrote about the writings of Paul and he referred to those? Or is it talking about some other person? Is it talking about other people? For example, when I read Timothy, who is it talking about? Timothy. So I should go back and study the life of Timothy a little bit and find out more about him if I really want to understand the book of Timothy. Or if it refers to somebody in that book, well, who was that and why are they important and why is he referring to them? And in 2 Timothy, Paul writes about Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. And he talks about a couple other people as well. And so I would want to go back and look up, who are these people? and what relation do they have with Paul? What's significant about them? What's important about them? So are there places, passages, or people they refer to in relation to that? Then number D, you always need to understand the words and their meanings. In other words, like, for example, love. In the Bible, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Romans 5:8, but God commended his love. Those come from the word charity. Charity in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, charity suffered long. And that's a different word than other words for love. In fact, there's 3 words that are translated love in the Bible. And so it's good to understand where the word comes from. And so we want to understand the words and meanings. Now, with this program, I can do that as well. One of the things I can do with this program is I can look up words. So with this section here, I can go to Search Bible, and I could tell it love. And I could look up every place the word love is used. And there's 286 times the word love is used in the Bible. And so I could look at every one of those places where it's used. I could also do, because what about where it says loveth or loves or something like that? I can go back here to my search, and I could type in love again, which is already there. And if I add an asterisk on the end, now there's 262 words. I think I hit the wrong thing. No, I hit the wrong thing. Let me go back here again. Let me get it right here. Yeah, I put a space between the asterisks. So add the asterisk right at the end of the word, and now it's going to look up 448 verses where the word love, loves, loved, loveth, any ending with love. Anything from love on is going to show up. Isn't that neat? So now I can find these words. So I can broaden it or I can narrow it down. If I remember, well, the word, it was loveth in that verse, then I only have to look up loveth. I could spell it out and find only the words that use loveth, and it's not 448 words I have to look at, verses I have to look at. So it kind of narrowed down. This also has other things you can do where you can look up this word and this word, or this word but not this word. You can look up where it says something in between the 2 words. So Jesus the Christ, you could put the asterisk in the middle, and you can look up wherever there's something between the words Jesus and Christ only. It wouldn't give you just Jesus Christ. It would give you where there's another word in between. It's amazing what this program will do. You can search all kinds of things to find them. And so you can narrow your search down by, you can do word searches, or if you remember a verse and you're looking for a specific verse or whatever else it might be, you can look those up. Now, when you look them up, the thing is, you want to understand what the word means. So I'm going to look up the meaning of the word, and I'm going to try to find the definition. And notice I put it in your own words. Whenever you find the definition, whether it's in English or the other language, somewhere that process, define it for yourself. Because sometimes the dictionary definitions leave me hanging. They really don't get me where I feel like I've got the word. And so I like to give my own definition to the word as well. Not that I'm reinterpreting the word. I'm just going to put it in words that I understand now what this word means. And so defining it for myself is what I'm challenged to do. Now, the first thing you want to do is look at the word in English. God has given us the Bible in our English language. And so what does the word mean in English? Look it up in an English dictionary. You can Google search it, find its definition, and find synonyms. Other words that mean the same thing, so you can kind of compare and get some other thoughts with that. So always start with English. If you speak another language as your first language, start with that language. Look it up in the language that you're reading the Bible in. And then you want to look it up in the original language. And you say, well, how can I do that? Well, if you have this program, you can do that. For example, in verse 2, it says to be transformed. I want to understand what that word transform means. So if I click on it, now it gives me a definition. So it comes from the word metamorpho. If you can see it on the screen there, it gives you the Greek word in English, and so metamorpho. Now you all recognize that word right away, right? A lot of our English words come from Greek words. And so boy, just immediately, just hearing the Greek word, it just opened up that word to me in a new way, didn't it? What do you think about when you think of metamorpho? Metamorphosis, which you think about what butterflies, right? Caterpillar to a butterfly. And that's what God says. We should be like a caterpillar to a butterfly in our transformation. Wow. That alone just really, that alone just opened it out a lot to me. Now it also tells me, next to it, those 2 blue numbers there, That's the Strong's number. Remember I showed you a Strong's concordance? And in there, he numbered every word in the Bible, and in the back, it's got the Greek word for that. And so they use those numbers still. And so this is a compound word from two Greek words, and so I can click on it and find out what words it's from. So this one is meta, which means with, after, among, behind. And then the other one, the other part of this compound word is to form. So to form with. So that's where we get our transform from. So I can see a little bit of that aspect. And then below it, it tells me what it's translated as in the King James Bible. So it's translated in two places, transfigure, in another place, transform, and another place is translated as change. So I've got that, and then it gives me the definition right below here. And it'll tell me some synonyms in the Greek language as well, and I can click on that, and here's some other words I can look up that I can compare with it if I want to. So a lot you can get out of that. Now here's the other thing I can do with that as well, is I can not only do that, but I can also go over here, back here again. What I would do is come back here, and I want to search. I can search that word in the Bible. So I can click on that. Wait a minute. Give me a second here. Get the right place here. Okay. Why does it give me that number? I'm not. But you can search for that. You can do it this way, or you can just type in the number 2. So if I go search Bible and I type in number 3339, now it gives me those 4 verses where it's used. So now I can compare. There's cross references I can compare for that verse and see how it's used differently in other passages. I could also go in there and look up the word transform in its different forms. I could type that in there as well. And again with the asterisks. And I can look it up where it's used, the word it's used, and in some cases different. If I come over here and hit display, I can tell it I want to see the Strong's numbers. And now I can see, well, that's 3339. That's the same number there. But over here, it's 3345. So how is that different? I go look at it. It's a different word. Meta-semitzo. More like that schizophrenia. It's like 2 different people. So I can look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15, and it's a different word than the word in Romans 12. And so now I can see that. Let me take the display off so I can read it easier. Oops. Okay, where am I at here? Get back in my place. I got to take this off first. Give me a second here. All right, now we'll take that and go back to the hide Strongs. Okay, so 2 Corinthians 11 through 15 uses a different word. It says, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. So they're not really changed. It's an outward change, but not an inward change. So it's a different word. See what I'm saying? How that opens up your Bible study when you are able to do that. And this is where the blessing of the computer program is, because you can then look at those things and see that. If we were to do 1 Corinthians 13:4, the love chapter, that's one where I think it's really important to understand the different words. And so we go back there and we close all these out. Now I can display, open the Bible, and you do 1 CO 13:4. Okay, charity suffered long. Well, what does it mean to suffer long? It's macrothumia. Again, words we recognize. Macro is big or long. Thumia means to what? Burn, thermal. That's where we get the word thermal from. So it's to burn long. If you've heard me preach on 1 Corinthians 13, talk about like a candle that keeps burning. You can't blow it out. Every time you blow it out, it lights back up again, is one of the illustrations. And again, I can look that up, and I can also look up, and I can see that it's translated as be patient, have patience, have long patience, bear long, suffer long, long suffering, patiently endure. You see what I'm saying? And I could also go and look up the English word long suffering and see where it's used elsewhere in the Bible. A lot of stuff you can do with just one word. Amazing how much you can get out of that. And this is why word studies are important and why you want to be able to look it up. You don't have to be a Greek scholar. You don't have to be a Hebrew scholar. This will do the same thing with the Hebrew language. You can do all this with this computer program. God's given us an amazing tool to help us to study our Bible and just to help us to open it up even more in our understanding of the Scriptures in doing that. So you want to look it up in the original languages. You also want to look up similar words. Words, they're almost like the same thing, but not exactly. So it sounds the same. So again, long-suffering, I think of patient with that, or some other words that would go along with it. And you can compare it to other words. If I compare transform to transfigure, comparing it can help me see some things with the Bible as well. And then you also want to look up the word in its historical and cultural context. Words have changed over the years. Surfing does not mean what it meant when I was a teenager. It's a very, very different word today. Yeah, it still means going out in the waves, but it's something else entirely, and most of us wouldn't think of it. Dialing a phone, you don't do that anymore. Words change constantly. So you want to look at the word. What did this word mean back in the day that it was written in Bible days? What did it mean when the Bible was translated? The Bible says the word let. We think of you can do something, but in the King James Bible, when it was written, it meant stopping from doing something. And so there's a difference in the word. So I want to understand the historical context and the cultural context. One of the things I found when I was over in the Philippines preaching, some of the things I said, they understood the word, but they didn't understand the culture. Because it's a different culture over there. It's a different lifestyle. And so we would all immediately get, they would not. Because there's a cultural context to the words as well, even though we're speaking the same language. And that's even true in America, down south versus up north. And so I remember when I was a young Christian, I was in a church one time, the pastor was preaching about things that Christians shouldn't do, and he said Christians shouldn't go out mixed bathing. And I thought, yeah, I don't think that's a good thing to do either, taking baths together. But down south, mixed bathing meant going swimming together, boys and girls, which made sense when you stopped and thought about it, because out on the beach, you're wearing, if a guy walked in and a girl wearing what she wears on the beach, she would scream. But she's okay with it out on the beach, and they're out there touching each other in places they shouldn't. I can understand what he's saying. But the cultural context threw me off for a while there. I couldn't figure out what kind of place is this where they take baths together, and it took me a while to figure that out. So this is all in that context. Now, this program will do so much, folks. I just can't overemphasize it. It's got commentaries built into it. It's got where you can make your own personal notes into it. It's got cross-references and definitions and search capabilities are amazing in there. And you can do all kinds of things with the footnotes and so on. There's just so much that's in this program. And I wanted to show it to you because I've talked about it, but I think some of you don't realize what's available to you there. And at your fingertips. 100 years ago, they didn't have that. 100 years ago, Strong's was the breaking technology, this big, huge book. And if I wanted to look up something, I had to go down there and look down this whole long list and look up all those verses one at a time until I found it. Now I can narrow it down by 2 words or by this plus that, and it's all right there at my fingertips. And it's amazing what you've got, but you need to use it. And so I would challenge you to consider getting it. And again, if you want to get the Mac version, if you let me know that, we'll go ahead and order it together and get you a cheaper price on that. Otherwise, you can again go online, online Bible. I think it's onlinebible.net. But if you type in Google search online Bible, you'll find it there. And then you can download it. It's a little complicated. They don't have a real easy website to use, but it's well worth the effort. All right, let's go on to number E there. And that's answer the following questions. Are there any significant themes? We talked about that little synthetical. What's the theme here? What's the illustration, that first blank? Are there illustrations? Again, the fruit of the Spirit, that's an illustration. There's another place where he uses the body as an illustration. Other places where he uses sports as the illustration. What's the illustration that's being used? The object lesson or whatever else you want to call it. And then are there any concepts being introduced here? Is there a specific concept that I need to kind of get a hold of, understand, that's being introduced in this passage? Then I want to ask myself, number 2, are there any contrasting ideas or thoughts? Okay, is he contrasting this with something else in the Bible, that this versus this? Is there somewhere else in the Bible where the contrast is? For example, Jesus is referred to as the lion, right? But so is Satan. So it's kind of contrasting the two. And so are there concepts that are opposite? where he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, he also talks about the works of the flesh. Those are two opposite concepts. So they're kind of going with against each other, contrasting, or thoughts. So we want to look at that. Number 3, are there any repeated words or thoughts? God never repeats himself without a reason. I do. My wife sometimes says, you got to quit repeating yourself so much in your messages. You've already said it, just go on to the next thing. I tend to repeat myself, but God doesn't, unless he has a reason. So if he says the same thing, whether it's the same words or the same thing in different words, whenever it's different words, then I want to understand what's the difference between those two words. When it's the same thing, then he's really saying to me, you better pay attention. Because when God says something more than once, it's really important. You better pay attention to this. And so I've got to look for that. And then number 4, are there any questions asked or statements made? Sometimes they're rhetorical questions. What's a rhetorical question? Don't answer that because it's a rhetorical question. You all know what it is, right? A rhetorical question means we don't expect the answer. Everybody knows the answer automatically. You don't have to answer that question. It's just assumed that you know it. Sometimes there are specific questions that God's saying, listen, you need to ask yourself, is this true about you? So is there any specific questions that are listed in that passage, or are there very specific statements made? Thou shalt not. Is there a specific statement made that we need to pay attention to? Now here's where you need to get the application. It's great to study the Bible, but if you don't apply it to your life, you're wasting your time. And so what's the application of this passage to me? Now, when you're doing devotions, it's a very simple application. How does it apply to my life in the next 24 hours? And you should apply it all day long as you go through your day. When you're doing Bible study, it's a broader application. Sometimes the Bible study is to find out. I want to know, for example, I preached on music on Sunday. And so you might say, well, what kind of music should I listen to? So you're going to do a study of the Bible about music. And then after you've studied about it, now you're going to apply it. Well, here's what I should listen to, and here's what I should not listen to. So the application. So I'm going to ask myself, first of all, what particularly stands out to me? As I read this passage, is there something that kind of pops out of the page to me? It says, bang. We're doing Philippians in our legacy class on Sunday school. I'm teaching that right now. And we're going verse by verse. We get through about 2 verses a week. I'm not real fast. But there's so many things that stand out to me. It talked about that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And it talks about the name of Christ being so important. And so I looked at those things, and what bounced out to me is, well, what about the name of Christ? There's at least 102 different names for Christ in the Bible. And we use maybe 3 or 4 of them. What does it mean when he calls himself the Son of Man? We ought to pay attention to the name of Christ. It's important. God says it's important, so important, we're going to worship him for that, just his very name. So we're going to bow down, bow on knees. So should I be bowing now? So those are the kind of things that would pop out to me as I read the verse. What is the application? What is it saying to me personally? Are there promises to claim? When I read that verse, is there a promise in that verse? But my God shall supply all you need according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Wow. I want God to supply all my needs. That's a great promise. Now I need to go back and say, well, what do I got to do to claim that promise? I got to give to missions is one thing. Because it said, because you've given again and again and again, my God shall supply your needs. So I need to understand the promise and understand what I got to do to claim that promise. So are there any promises in that passage? Is there a command to obey? Is there something that says you should be doing this? Is there a command, specific command in that passage? Number 3, is there a sin to avoid? Is there something that's saying here, got to deal with your anger? Ephesians chapter 4 does that, a couple places there. You got to be careful of the words that you use. Ephesians chapter 5. So is there some sin? It's telling me, hey, you got to deal with this sin in your life. Then number D, is there a principle to apply? The Bible's just not it's not just a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. It's a book of principles. So here's a principle that I can apply. Touch not the unclean thing. That's a good principle. Okay? If any man defile the temple of God, that's a good principle. So there's principles that I can apply. The Bible never says, for example, thou shalt not smoke, but it says don't defile your temple. So I think that would apply to smoking, would you not? So there's a good principle I can apply. Number two, what truth is conveyed by this teaching? Is there a truth in this passage? You should have kind of in your mind and maybe even on paper a list of Bible truths. This is God's truths. If you allow bitterness in your life, then it's going to lead to other things further. So that's the truth of God. So is there truth in the passage? How can I put it into practice in my life? What can I do specifically right now to practice this verse? To practice this truth, this principle, this promise, whatever it is. Get down to the nitty-gritty. Get down to the rubber meets the road. Get down to right now, what is something I could do to put into practice what I just studied, what I just learned. And then, number 4, what verse or verses should I memorize? You should always be looking for verses to memorize. And what you do is you keep a verse list. Put it on your computer, put it on your phone, have it written out, and just add another verse to it. And you may never get to it. I've got a verse list so long, I'll never memorize them in my lifetime, I don't imagine. But you keep adding to it, and sometimes you can prioritize it. You know, like on your notes here, I have on my phone a notes section. I can make this number 1, very important priority. And I say, this is a verse I need to memorize now. But they may be verse, this is one I want to memorize sometime. And this is a verse that I could memorize sometime. But start a verse list. And then number 5, what should I study further? Okay, I've learned about this. So now, what do I want to start studying next? And sometimes what I'm doing is I'm studying a book of the Bible, and I come to something, wow, that's really good. And I'm going to stop my study of the book of the Bible, and I'm going to go do a topical study on that topic. Because I really could use that right now. So I'm going to stop and focus on that. And so what should I study next? Or I'm going to put on my list of things I want to study in the future. Letter G, using a commentary, check your answers to the questions above. Remember I said a commentary is somebody in written form teaching you about that book. If you have a commentary in Ephesians, he's teaching you about Ephesians. He's going to give you word information. He's going to do all the things we just did. But don't do that until you've done your part. Let your mind think. Don't let him do the thinking for you. But when you're done, go look at the commentary and compare it to what you came up with. And if what you had and he has is very different, it doesn't mean you're wrong. But it does mean I need to do a little more thinking and study on this to make sure I'm right. So the commentary isn't perfect. It's not inspired. These guys have studied out the Bible, but I've disagreed with them at times. Or a lot of times, they just don't even ask the question I've asked. And so he doesn't give me an answer because he didn't even think the way I'm thinking. But there's been times I've gone to the commentary and he said something different. I said, okay. And I've studied out, and sometimes I think I'm right and I think he's wrong. And other times I find, you know what? He's right and I'm wrong. I've got to correct what I had. Because I went a wrong direction with that. And then letter H, review and record your thoughts. Write your own commentary. Have your own little binder or place on your computer you're keeping notes or whatever, and write this down. Because then when you go back and study this book next time, you got a starting point. You started here, you got to here. Next time you get to start here and go to here. You get further each time you go back to it. And later on, if you have questions, you go back. I did a study in Ephesians. I'm going to go back and look that up and see what I wrote down. And so record this stuff. And it doesn't have to be perfectly. You're not getting up and preaching it. You're not publishing a book. It needs to be good enough you can figure it out. Now, you got to be good to do that because, to be honest with you folks, everything I'm teaching you right now in Doctrine, this whole series all the way through, it's based upon my wife's notes. Because my notes, number one, you couldn't read half of them. And number two, the other half were mostly pictures and doodles and scribbles and things like that. I've never been a good note taker, but I think it's well worth the effort. And so don't worry if it's not perfect. That's okay, because it's for you. It's not for everybody else. And my wife is a better note taker. Okay, so that's analytical. Synthetical, whole, analytical, narrowed down. Exegetical, boy, this is when really we're going to milk every drop out of it we can. We're going to go right down to the details. Do you still have notes on yours? Mine are different. So you got to okay. So we're going to analyze. Excuse me. We're going to now really get to every last bit out of it we can. So we're going to look at the details. It is necessary to have an understanding of the context of the verse or verses you are studying. Exegetical, you're narrowing it down to usually one up to maybe a dozen verses at the most. It's a section, it's a passage like you might do an exegetical study on the fruits of the Spirit or something like that. Now, some will define it broader than that, but it's really you're narrowing it down now to a small section that you're gonna really get every detail out of it you can. And so but to do that properly, you've got to already have done the synthetical, analytical, exegetical. You can't do a decent exegetical if you haven't done the broader scope. So you've got to have that. Establish a framework for your study. When I'm working on an outline like this, or I'm working on a sermon, first thing I do is I write my main number 1, 2, and 3, my Roman numerals. And by the time I get to the end, they may be 3 totally different things. But it gives me a starting place. It gives me a framework for that study to do. Something to kind of narrow it down. Then number C, be sure you understand the meaning of each word in the verse or verses. So this is where you stop and you're going to look up every word, especially those that you don't understand, but even some you do. You might think I understand it, but I want to understand it better. Now there's some words you don't know what they mean. How many, honestly right now, in your mind, you think you know the definition of the word concupiscence? It's a Bible word. How many think you know the definition of that word? Most of you don't. Now you may have looked it up at some point, but you've probably forgotten it. And you might want to look that one up. But there's some words, I got to look it up because I have no clue what that means. There's other words that, like long-suffering, I know what it means, but looking it up, I know better what it means when I see it means it's from the word metamorpho. And so you want to look up every word. You don't have to look up the words the or a or and or some other basic words. But most of the words, you want to look them up. Number D, look up cross-references for each word or phrase. Now, instead of the whole verse, I'm looking up cross-references for that one word. I want comparison verses and contrasting verses. Let me know when we're coming to the end of your notes, by the way, because mine are a little different than yours. So I want to find verses that compare. In other words, they say the same thing. Then I want to find verses that contrast, that say kind of the opposite thing. And then questions to ask here. What is the historical, cultural context of the words and phrases used? Same question, now more detailed, okay? And breaking it down. I'm going to give you these because there's no notes to fill in. You'll get this next week. I'm just going to give you these last few things and we'll finish up. What would be an equivalent application today? So, for example, when the Bible talks about thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light to my path, there's 2 different words there. So I need to understand what's the difference between a lamp and a light. One of them is like carrying a lantern where you got a circle of light. The other one's like carrying a flashlight where you can focus the light. And then, did they have flashlights back in that day? No. So I've got to understand it a little bit better in that context, and then how would I apply it today? They would think of candles or lanterns or those kind of things. What do I think of today? Batteries and flashlights and plug-ins. So it's a different, but that's fine. God wrote the Bible to be universal throughout time. And so there's nothing wrong with me thinking, I need to understand it historically, but I can also understand it today for me. So every time I turn a flashlight on, I think of that verse. I think of that concept. Who are these words being spoken to and why? Very, very important. Who's he talking to? If he's talking to Israel, it may not apply to you in the same way. If he's talking to the unsaved, it's different. He's talking to Christians. So I want to know who he's talking to. Is he talking to a very specific person? When he said to Judas, when the Bible says Judas hanged himself and you read, go thou and do likewise, well, I don't think he's telling you to do what Judas did. So you want to understand who is he talking to, and is he also talking to me, or is he not talking to me? If he's talking to Israel, then it's not a specific command to me, but it's an application to me. The dietary laws aren't a command to me, but there's application I can receive from there. And then how does the context of the passage affect the definition and application of the word? If I were to say to somebody, I'll give you a ring, what does that mean? Depends on the context. Most would think, I'll call you. But what if I were to say that, what if I said that to my wife when we were dating? She'd think, oh, we're getting engaged. You know, or you could think of a ring as a boxing ring. We're going to have a fight here. You know, what are we talking about? The context of the word changes the word meaning. So I need to understand that context. Does it change the definition or the application of the word? When Paul was writing to Christians and said something that sounded like you got to work to be saved, we know that they're already saved. So it's not like they have to work to be saved, so the application changes the context. And then, is there a concrete picture given to help me to understand the abstract principles? When God says fruit of the Spirit, he chose fruit for a reason. So think about fruit. When God says Satan is like a roaring lion, he's saying that for reasons. So think, why does a lion roar? He roars. He doesn't roar when he's sneaking up on his prey. He didn't go, roar, here I come, roar. When does he roar? Last thing he does before he pounces, he roars to paralyze his prey with fear. So there's a difference there. So God gives us concrete things that we can touch, we can feel, we can taste, we can smell, things that we can see, concrete things to help us understand the abstract idea. And then the sixth one is, what are the root words and synonyms for this word? Again, I like to look at root words, like exercise come from gymnazo, so on. And I like to look at the other words that mean the same thing or are similar to that word. And then again, I'm going to use a commentary to check your conclusions in this study as well.